Hi, welcome to Valley News Digest. I'm John Gregg, the news editor of the Valley News. We're the daily paper here in the Upper Valley. We've been here since 1952, based in West Lebanon. We cover statewide issues in both New Hampshire and Vermont, and we cover most of Orange County and Windsor County in Vermont, and Grafton County and Sullivan County in New Hampshire. And of course, we're also on the web at vnews.com, so you can read us there too. This is town meeting season, which is an old tradition in both these states, one we cover pretty extensively, and we happen to have two Valley News veterans here with us today who combined have been with the paper for more than 50 years. So we'll be talking about town meeting a little bit more, especially in our second segment of the show. But joining us first is our news columnist, Jim Kenyon, who grew up in West Windsor, went to Windsor High School, and started reporting for the Valley News as a sports stringer while he was still in high school. Jim did go to the big city down in Tampa, Florida, worked for a paper here, but came back to the Upper Valley about 22 years ago and has been with the paper since on that stretch, too. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You write about a lot of different topics, but a lot of times it seems to be about a person who is being treated unfairly by the system. What do you look for in a column?
Well, I think a column is a way to tell a story in a short amount of space. Now, most of my columns are 850 to 900 words, so you have to be pretty concise. And it's a cliche, but as a writer, I'm trying to give people a voice who in our society don't often have a voice. A recent example of that would be Sophia Green, who was a Jamaican woman who was a housekeeper at DHMC who lost her job. And I think that was a good illustration of what immigrants in this country can be up against. And then another example of that would be Scott Pixley, who was a dishwasher who lived in Stratford, who got pulled over by Hartford police this summer, and for allegedly driving under the influence of a prescription drug, which was sort of an unheard of offense in this day and age. But that actually worked out, so he didn't lose his driver's license, so he could keep his job. So I think it's important that we get those stories in the paper, and that's what I try to do.
Sure. And how was it adjudicated on the initial charge?
Well, David Cahill, the Windsor County prosecutor, he's a pretty progressive guy. He could see that. I don't think he really saw they had a case for a prescription drug charge, so he reduced the charge, and then so this allowed Scott to keep his license, and basically, if he stays out of trouble for the next year, the case goes away.
Yeah, one of the great things about being at the Valley News, it seems, is we have a very engaged readership. That sparked a lot of interest, and didn't a lot of people also step forward and try and help Mr. Pixley and the Pixley family with legal bills?
Yes, well, actually, Charlie Buttrey, a Lebanon attorney, took the case pro bono, but people in Stratford and just the Upper Valley in general, I think this resonated with them because there are millions of people that are taking prescription drugs and driving, and while there needs to be laws about this kind of thing, I don't think this was a good use of it.
Yeah, a lot of your columns seem to be about things dealing with police. Why is that, and what are you trying to accomplish with them?
Well, in our society, I think police have the ultimate power. They can take away a person's freedom. They can take a human life. We saw that in the last few years in Canaan and Claremont. So I believe with that, the power that police have, I think you have to hold them to a higher standard. Policing is hard work. Undoubtedly, they're unpaid, but we still need to push for greater accountability and transparency, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, you said unpaid. You mean underpaid?
Underpaid,
right.
Yes.
Right.
Underpaid, yes.
They are paid. We cover police budgets too sometimes, but. There is a lot of social media chatter sometimes that suggests, some readers think, oh, you dislike cops, but I have seen you talking to chiefs who you have written critically about, You get some news tips. We won't spill any state secrets here, but you get some news tips from people who you've sparred with in your column in the past. And I know, for instance, you befriended the late Hanover Police Chief Nick Giaccone, who had a stroke, and you were there a lot for him, at the end of his life, and would visit him. So what's in that mix? I mean, why do these chiefs wind up, talking to you again? Do you think?
Well,
or other cops?
No, and I think people can disagree on issues, and we can look at the world differently. But we can still be civil, and I think that's the an important thing. And most of the police chiefs in this area are very professional, and I like to think they don't hold grudges. And Chief Giaccone was a good example of someone. We obviously disagreed over the years, but I remember one time before he got sick, I was shopping in the Lebanon Co-op and ran him into the pasta aisle. And we just started having this conversation about what was the best brand of spaghetti sauce. And that was, it was no talking about newspapers or policing. It was just two guys pushing around grocery carts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of reporting, too, is being out in the community talking to people, and you do that, which really leads, to my next question here, which is, it's no secret you live in Norwich. Also, your wife works for the Dartmouth Alumni magazine, but Norwich and Dartmouth are two frequent subjects, and some might say, targets in your columns. I mean, and one very notable column, or series of columns, for instance, was about the late Andy Harvard, who worked for the Dartmouth Outing Club and was forced to resign, and then it turned out that he had early Alzheimer's disease, and you wrote some columns about their efforts to have Dartmouth reopen that case. But is it uncomfortable for you sort of doing these stories, or how does that sugar out?
No, not at all. I mean, there's an old expression in journalism that our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think we know which category Dartmouth and Norwich would fall into in that scheme of things. The Andy Harvard column, Andy was, yes, a wonderful man. I got to know him in the last few years of his life, but he was he was a Dartmouth alum who was working heading up the Dartmouth Outing Club, and was basically fired or forced to quit. And a few months after that, he was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's. And at the time, he didn't know that, but that was why it was leading to his poor job performance. And I think that story was one of the biggest disappointments in my career, is that I couldn't get anyone at Dartmouth, and I wasn't the only one, lawyers tried, some alums tried, to get the college to see that it wasn't setting a precedent by helping Andy, and that they really, and his family was looking for like $200,000. It wasn't a lot of money for an institution with $5.5 billion endowment. But the college, I guess, didn't want to set a precedent, and they walked away from it.
Yeah. You have said, we were talking the other day, and you've said, the fact that you grew up in the Upper Valley is kind of an advantage, or, I mean, do you see that, or, what drew you back? What's it like working in the place where you were, has always been your home?
I think it is an advantage, because granted, the Upper Valley has changed a lot. I mean, Windsor, when I was a kid growing up, Windsor had two big factories, Cone Blanchard, Goodyear, and it was a different community. So I've seen the changes that have happened here, and maybe I'm a little nostalgic at times, remembering when, Claremont, on a Friday night, the main street was so busy that you'd have to have police officers at both ends of the street to help the pedestrians across, and that's not the case anymore. But I think having a little bit of historical knowledge of the Upper Valley does help me put things in perspective.
Yeah, neither you nor I are quite that old, but the thing that's always struck me is, I think I read once that Windsor, which had all these factories related to World War, production during World War II, was actually the largest employer in the state at one point.
It was, and then in Springfield, all these towns up and down the Connecticut River Valley were very prosperous, and someone could come out of high school and make a decent living without going to college, and raising a family and buying a home, and that's just not happening anymore.
Yeah. You've won a lot of awards over the years for your reporting, and you do certainly serve as a mentor for some younger reporters in our newsroom. What do you think makes a good reporter?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to work at a good newspaper. I mean, I think that and so pick your where you want to work carefully, because I've been lucky at the Valley News. I mean, we're probably one of the smallest papers in the country that have a full-time columnist, so that's definitely an advantage for me. But there's something when I learned in college, a professor said, and it sounds kind of maybe outdated, but he said what a good reporter needs is a good pair of shoes. And that means, so I try to tell the young reporters that, and I remind myself of this, is that get out of the office, get off the phone, stop looking at your emails, because you have to be out in your communities if you want to get the good stories.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I've done a lot of political reporting. Some of that you can certainly do over the phone, but you're talking to someone in person, they're gonna tell you more, they're gonna be more comfortable talking to you, and you're gonna get a better story.
And I'm a dinosaur in many ways, because I don't use Facebook. I wouldn't even know how to begin to use Twitter, but I think it works for me. It probably wouldn't work for younger people necessarily.
Jim, thank you for being here, and more columns to come. And Jim also helped us out, covered Pomfret at town meetings. So,
I always enjoy that,
so
yes.
Thank you for that. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we'll be joined by Jennifer Hauck, our chief photographer, who has shot a lot of town meetings over the years. We're joined now by Jennifer Hauck, our chief photographer here at the Valley News. She's been with the paper for about 25 years. Like Jim Kenyon, Jen grew up in Vermont. Her parents ran a general store up in the Northeast Kingdom. I think, Jen, you were behind the counter a bit then as a kid. But she's quick to point out that she is not a native. And one of the big events of the year is town meeting season. Jen has covered a lot of those. What do you enjoy photographing about them?
It's a little bit of everything. It's communities coming together, there's politics and government, there's a lot of personalities, there's the young folks coming out and kind of figuring out what this crazy thing town meeting is, and a lot of old timers wearing plaid and a lot of wool, and it's always very visual, and it's a great way to show what a town is like, kind of the personality of the town, and often it's finished with pie, and it's always great when things end with pie.
I agree, and I was going to say there's some constants are flannel and food at town meeting, but there's also some beautiful buildings or some historic buildings that people are in. Does that make it into the settings? Does that make it interesting?
Yes, light is a really big deal for photographers. So some town meetings are in beautiful buildings. The Stratford Townhouse is certainly at the top of the list, probably for that. West Windsor also has some great light. Not all of them are beautiful. Some can be in gyms, in elementary school gyms, which the rhetoric is still the same, but the visuals aren't always the same. And of course, as a photographer, visuals are really important.
Because we do it every year, I mean, is it hard to come up with an original photograph from something that you've photographed for 15, 20 years?
I've been banned from photographing one gentleman in Lyme by my photographics editor, Jeff Hansen. But there's always something new. There's always something different. There's sometimes students are there. Kids are often come with their parents. So there's always something new, but there are many people that you've seen many times before too.
Yeah, and I think there are little things that change that I know that we photographed over the years. When I first started going to town meeting in 1995, I know, obviously there were people knitting sweaters and that sort of thing. That still happens a little bit, but now, for instance, and we've done stories about that, lots of people on their smartphones, as they are everywhere.
Lots of people on their phones. There are still the knitters. I got, one year I had a whittler, and that was kind of fun. But plenty of people on their smartphones, if there is cell coverage. In some towns, still don't have that.
Sure. What are you trying to depict in these photographs, and how important are photos telling the story in the Valley News?
Hopefully really important, and depicting the flavor of the day, you know, which maybe sounds a bit funny, but it's, I think in the past I've noticed town meetings have seemed to be a bit shorter, and things will pass pretty quickly, so there's not as much confrontation, but sometimes there can be, and there's almost always one person who's maybe a little grouchy in town and likes to stand up and kind of wag their finger and say, you know, why are we paying for this? And so it's a good balance to show that, as well as people being really pleased with what's happening in their town.
Yeah. As the news editor, I deal a lot with Jeff Hansen, our photo editor, and with Jen and other photographers about what we're going to photograph, and I've learned a lot over the years, still have a lot more to learn, but you know, unlike other papers, we don't run a lot of photos just of buildings. We want to have people in them, because ultimately we're telling stories about people's lives or things that affect people, right? So you guys have been working on me over the years.
We've been working on you. Buildings and signs, we know that's something that you have asked for a lot in the past, and we're trying to hopefully show the whole community, because yeah, it's about people doing things and being busy, and we just want to show what they're doing.
Yeah. One of my favorite town meeting photos was something that James Patterson, another photographer, took in Stratford maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was a dog walking down the center aisle, unaccompanied, no leash, in the Stratford Townhouse at town meeting. But more broadly, what is it about dogs and photos at the Valley News? We do have a lot of them.
Who doesn't love dogs? Well, a lot of people don't like dogs, but a lot of people do like dogs. And it can be really hard when you approach someone who's out doing something and you want them to forget you're there. And often if they have a dog, they might be paying attention to their dog rather than paying attention to you. And people feel really passionate about their dogs. And I think all the photographers are dog lovers at the Valley News as well. And I was just thinking this morning about how many dogs are in New Yorker cartoons too, so we're in good company keeping dogs on our pages.
For the record, I happen to have a very photogenic dog, but you're not going to see him in the Valley News. We also always seem to, and it's a running joke in the newsroom, but you can't come back with a photograph of a dog and not have the dog's name for our caption. Why is that?
It's information. I get the person's name, I'm going to get the dog's name. I'm not going to lessen the dog by any means by not having its name.
Yep. Over the years, I've learned that candid photos, people actually engaged in action, are much more interesting than group shots where people sit there and say cheese, which, by the way, for people who are their designated photographer at their family reunions, keep that in mind. I even harp on my own family. It's much more interesting just to shoot people sitting around the barbecue or doing things like that rather than posing. But we also do take portraits of people from time to time. And you, for instance, took what I thought was an amazing portrait of the late William Sloane Coffin, who was a civil rights activist and minister in Stratford. How do those work? What are you looking for when you're doing a portrait?
Portraits, it's spending some time with someone, which doesn't always happen. That photo I took, I think, during part of an interview. That's where we happened to sit with the reporter, and the light was nice. Again, light is really important. And it's important for people to be comfortable in front of a camera, which is really hard. Not everyone's used to it, and we kind of naturally sometimes put on a smile that's not their normal smile because the camera's there. So it's a way of talking with someone. You tell stupid jokes, maybe a family member's around to chat a little bit, so you have some conversation first and just try to get someone to relax.
What I thought was pretty cool about that too is he was this international figure. The minister in Doonesbury in some regards might have been somewhat inspired by him, but here he was in the latter years of his life at a farmhouse kitchen in Vermont where he had established some real roots, and so we showed him in his element there, I think.
He looked very at home in his kitchen with his nice worn kitchen table.
Yep. Talk a little bit, though, we just mentioned it briefly, we don't want people posing, and in fact, we won't photograph people who are doing something that's just set up for us, right?
It's amazing to me. I'm the one who often calls and will call someone about an assignment, and all the time people say, well, we could fake something, and we never fake something. We can't ever fake anything. That's not what we do as journalists. And we just want people to pretty much ignore us and go about and do what they do.
And we get out there every day. One of the great things, we have a decent-sized photo staff. They do a lot of different work, including sports at night, and but we do. They are a huge part of stories. I tell young reporters, if you want your story to get better play in the newspaper, work with our photographers, because good photos will really make that story, so much better. We're in March now. The weather is about to change. We've had a lot of photos of people shoveling snow. We've all been shoveling snow. What's your favorite time of year to take photographs?
I think the fact that we have so many seasons, I guess, is I don't have a favorite time. So the fact that now we're kind of done with shoveling and kid sledding and ice fishing, and we'll move on to mud season, and after that, summer. So every season has kind of a different type of photo or people are doing different things outside when we go out looking for what we call standalones. And that's a photo that doesn't go with a story, and they can be fun to find, they can be really hard to find, but so I don't really have a favorite time, but I like the fact that the seasons change and people's activities change a lot.
I can guarantee you we're going to have a photograph or two of people sugaring in the Upper Valley pretty soon, because that is another great tradition that I think is probably fun to go out and talk to the folks who are doing it, see the family ties, and it's a pretty visual activity.
It's very visual, and we always have a full-time intern at the paper, so I think the intern that is here during sugaring season is kind of in for a treat to see something they've probably not seen before.
That is something to take back home for them. Well, that'll do it. Thank you, Jen, for joining us, and thank you, viewers. We'll hope you'll tune in again next month for another episode of Valley News Digest, and of course, pick up the paper, the Valley News, every day. Thank you.